Welcome to the KuppingerCole Analyst Chat. I'm your host. My name is Matthias Reinwarth. I'm an analyst and advisor at KuppingerCole Analysts. My guest today is Christopher Schütze, and he is the Director Practice Cybersecurity here at KuppingerCole, working out from Stuttgart. Hi, Christopher.
Hi, Matthias. Haven't talked to you for a while. Nice to be back.
Good to have you back. And we want to connect directly to the episode that we did last week. I did together with our colleague Alexei Balagansky, and we talked about the obstacles towards zero trust. What keeps organizations from implementing zero trust? Why is there not enough zero trust from an analyst perspective already within the organizations? And we want to catch up here. And you, as the director of the cybersecurity practice here at KuppingerCole, maybe we can talk a bit about what should be done, what could be done, what are the right first steps for organizations aiming at zero trust, where to start. What would be your starting point when it comes to implementing zero trust in the real life?
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. I also heard what Alexei explained last week, and it was really interesting. When starting zero trust, the first thing you need to realize is that zero trust is not a single tool. It is a combination of several tools. So it is having something like an identity management, something like an access management, something for network transparency and things like that. This is really the first thing you need to understand before you start. And then zero trust is something more or less like a process. Zero trust is often mentioned with trust nobody, and this is honestly not true. It just means trust nobody without verification. And this is the idea behind. And just think, if you take, for instance, a risk management approach here, where would you start? You would start with identifying your assets, your things, your user, your data, your digital crown jewels. This is really the first thing you need to find. And this is where zero trust starts. Identify your assets, your user, and your data. And then assume there is something like a threat. Somebody is trying to steal your crown jewels. Somebody is trying to steal your user, your data, whatever. And this is the first assumption. And how to protect your data then here? This is quite simple, theoretically at least. You have to define policies which restrict the access to your assets, to your crown jewels. And these policies are not only covering authentication on an identity level, they also cover the network transparency, as I mentioned before. They might also cover data access governance topics. So are you as a person allowed to access this? And combining various metrics from various sources allows you to define really fine, granular policies to restrict access to your crown jewels, and therefore allow only people who are potentially allowed to access your crown jewels access. And this is honestly something like a circle, and every circle has a part where you verify and monitor your actions. So start with identification of your assets, then assume that someone is trying to steal your information, your data, define policies against it, and then verify your policies and monitor what is happening to really improve it step by step in second incarnation or things like that. This is the idea behind zero trust.
Okay, that sounds, for me as an identity guy, very much like a dynamic risk-based authentication. So we have identities on the one hand, we have strong identities because we need them. We have understood what our assets are, where we want to have access to. We know that the environment is hostile, so we need to protect to the left and the right and make sure that nobody can interfere with us. And we verify constantly what's going on within the network. So we have identity, context, access policies, have identified where I want to go to, where I'm allowed to go to. So this seems to be something that identity people should be used to, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Matthias. Risk-based authentication is really essential here and an important part to achieve a high level of trust against the person who is trying to access something. But it is not the only thing which is important. So on the one hand, for sure, we have the identity, but we also have the device a user is using. So for instance, currently, most of us are working from home. Some of us use their own device. They use their own network at home, maybe a wireless network with a router or things like that. And this is also a thing which is an important part of zero trust. So the device, which device is the user using? Can I trust the device? Is there potentially malware installed that hijacks his account and tries to get access to my data? This is also possible. Or can I trust the network in general, which the user is using? And this combined maybe with a simple example, the user is in vacation and tries to get access from somewhere like China and never did this before. So this is potentially a strange behavior. You have the information from the network, you have the information from your HR department, you have the vacation information and the behavior. And here you can detect something is uncommon. I don't give the user access, or maybe I combine it with a multi-factor authentication, ask for a second factor in that case. This is something you can really do. And this is also the most complex thing here, really to define good policies which cover all the contextual informations you have in a way that you are able to maintain the policy, but on the other hand, you have effective ones. And this is, as I mentioned before, the circle of zero trust, where verify monitoring is an important part of.
Right. So from a project perspective, from a planning perspective, I understand that additionally to the IAM, a strong IAM and strong authentication and strong risk-based authentication, we need to look at, on the one hand, multi-factor authentication. On the other hand, you've mentioned device management. Are these also important components to have at hand when going zero trust?
Especially the device is important. As mentioned, working from home, maybe with your own device, or just checking while you're on the road your business mails with your mobile device, with your private mobile device, might be a risk because you potentially access critical data, critical assets of your organization. And therefore, an important part of a zero trust strategy must be something like endpoint protection or endpoint protection detection and response. Really have the option or idea to understand the level of security of the device the user is using, trying to access your digital assets. And this is an important thing too, yes.
You've mentioned it, we're working from home. Many are working with their own personal devices. How good is endpoint protection when it comes to personally owned devices, not managed devices?
Yeah, that's a good question, because if it's your own device, nobody can force you to install something like a malware scanner and virus scanner, things like that. And nobody is checking which apps are installed, which applications are installed. And here is a high level of limitation possible. What is also possible in that case that, for instance, you do not allow access to really critical data within your organization from such devices. So maybe you implement something like a level of access for your data. So for instance, critical data can only be accessed from a company-owned device, and accessing an internal portal with information about the organization is not that critical. And this might be accessible via your personal device. And having a level of criticality of your data allows you to handle also unsecured devices to access data. On the other hand, you could work with things like virtual machines, virtual desktops to access critical data via a virtualization layer in between. This can also be an option.
So now that I understand that we have strong identities, we have ideally strong authentication. We have quite proper knowledge about the device, depending on whether it's a personally owned one or a corporate owned device. And we know very much about the resources, the assets to protect. What is the most endangered, the most difficult to grasp part in the equation?
Yeah, the most critical thing here is, and I mentioned this before, is the network at the end. So working from home, working from any cafe is dangerous because you don't know the network. You don't know the router, don't know the wireless LAN, you don't know how it is protected and whether traffic is monitored or not. And this is dangerous. Even if you have encryption with your data, the network is, when talking about a zero trust organization or strategy, the most critical thing, because currently we don't have a perfect solution how to handle this. So we can encrypt data in transit. We can ensure that the device has a certain level of security, or we deny access in the worst case. We have authentication for sure, but the network is critical. And here is happening a lot. There are strategies towards combining endpoint protection, detection, and response with the network. So something like XDR, really to allow the detection of uncommon behavior in the network, to also have some metric about the level of security of the used network. But this is something where we are currently working on in the industry, but this will come very soon and improve the level of zero trust a bit more.
Okay, if we think of zero trust as a means for a user to use a device to move across a network to access individual resources, no matter where they are, in the cloud, on-prem, wherever. We need to think of the following components. We need to think of identity and access management. We need to think, of course, of the applications properly secured and properly safeguarded. We need to think of the device properly managed, and network protection. You've mentioned XDR as the upcoming set of products to be in the right position to protect also the network. So when we're looking from a project perspective, and you as the advisor here, where would you start once somebody has a proper IAM in place? So let's assume that.
If one has a proper IAM in place, as mentioned, really at the beginning, start with identify your crown jewels, start with identifying your digital assets. This is really the first thing on a process level. And then decide maybe going more in the direction of risk-based authentication in the first step. Use things like the used device, use things like the time, the behavior, so general context to improve the authentication mechanism. And then in a further phase, go towards endpoint protection, detection, and response to understand how secure the used device is. You can also add a layer of data access governance, access governance on data level, and then followed by XDR or advanced network detection and response.
Right. So, and in the end, like every IT project, it's a journey. You've mentioned that before, and Alexei said that, and John said that, whom I've talked about zero trust as well. So we will not start with a big bang and have the complete mesh of connections within our organizations protected by zero trust. We will start, as you said, with identified high value, highly critical assets, the crown jewels you've mentioned, and then move forward, starting from them to a more sophisticated overall zero trust approach, not saying network, because that is really the end goal here. When it comes to resources that our audience can have a look at, we've mentioned that before. There is quite some research available at KuppingerCole. Is something special you would recommend?
Yeah, and a really interesting starting point is having a look at our blog. Maybe you search for the term zero trust, and then you find a lot of interesting content, maybe from me, maybe from Alexei, maybe from John too. And there are also some references towards our research documents.
Right, perfect. And if you want to get in touch with us and talk about your individual journey towards Zero Trust, we would be happy to respond to your questions. Just send a mail. Just get in touch anyway on Twitter, wherever you can find us. Thank you very much, Christopher, for being my guest today, and looking forward to having you in a further episode soon.
Thank you, Matthias.
Bye-bye.